My daughter stopped talking to me. Then I found out why and was shocked. When my daughter stopped talking to me, I thought it was just a phase. Teenagers get moody, they need space. I told myself it was normal, but days turned into weeks and then months, and suddenly I was living in a house with a stranger. A girl who used to be my little shadow now barely looked me in the eye, and I had no idea why. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself she'd come around, until I found out the truth, and it shattered me. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. It started so gradually that I almost didn't notice. At first it was little things, one-word answers, staying in her room more, eating dinner in silence. I chalked it up to teenage hormones. I mean, she was 16. It was normal for kids to pull away from their parents, right? At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But then it got worse. She stopped telling me about her day. When I asked how school was, she'd just shrug. When I knocked on her door, she barely responded. The worst part, she wasn't even fighting with me. No yelling, no attitude, no eye rolls, just nothing. It was like I didn't exist to her anymore. I thought back, trying to remember if something had happened. Had I said something wrong? Had I missed an important event? But nothing stood out. Everything seemed fine, until it wasn't. Then one day, I found her crying in her room. Not the quiet, sniffly kind of crying, but the gut-wrenching, heartbreaking sobs that you can feel in your chest. My heart stopped. I rushed to her side, tried to hold her, to ask what was wrong. But the second she saw me, she wiped her tears and turned away. "Mom, just go," she whispered. I felt like I had been slapped. My own daughter, my baby, didn't want me near her. And I had no idea why. That was the moment I realized something was really, really wrong. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed replaying every conversation, every moment, every possible mistake I could have made. The silence between us had stretched so long that I didn't even know where to start fixing it. But I couldn't just let this go on. She was hurting, and I was her mother. It was my job to help her, even if she thought she didn't want me to. The next morning, I tried to talk to her again. I knocked on her door, not barging in, just gently letting her know I was there. "Sweetheart, can we talk?" I waited, my heart pounding. Nothing. "Please," I added, hoping that would be enough to get her to open up. Still nothing. I could hear her moving inside, the soft rustling of blankets, maybe the click of her phone screen lighting up. She was awake, but she was ignoring me. Again. A sharp pain settled in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't know what's wrong, but I want to understand," I said, keeping my voice soft. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." Still no answer. At breakfast, she came downstairs, grabbed a piece of toast, and turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "School," she mumbled, not even glancing at me. "Do you want me to drive you?" "No." "Are you sure? Mom, no." She said it sharply, cutting me off, and for the first time in weeks, there was actual emotion in her voice. Frustration, anger, and that scared me more than the silence. She left without another word, and I just stood there, staring at the door, feeling completely useless. That day, I tried to push through my routine, but my mind kept circling back to her. I checked her social media, looking for some clue. Nothing. I debated calling one of her friends, but I didn't want to overstep. Then, in the afternoon, I made a decision. If she wouldn't talk to me, maybe someone else would. So I called her school. I asked to speak with one of her teachers, someone who might have noticed something. After a bit of back and forth, I was connected to her English teacher, Mrs. Lawson. I braced myself, hoping for some small insight. "Oh," Mrs. Lawson said after I explained why I was calling. "I was actually meaning to reach out to you." My stomach dropped. "Why?" There was a brief pause. "I think it's best if we discuss this in person." And that's when I knew. This wasn't just a phase. Something was seriously wrong. I don't think I've ever driven to a school faster in my life. My mind was racing, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. Was she skipping classes? Was she in trouble? Had she been doing things I had no idea about? I parked the car and walked into the school office, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Mrs. Lawson was waiting for me in a small conference room, looking calm but serious, like she knew something I didn't. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, gesturing for me to sit. I nodded, anxiety gnawing at my insides. "Of course," I replied, my voice tight. "What's going on? Is she okay?" Mrs. Lawson hesitated for a moment, glancing down at her notes before speaking. "Your daughter has been withdrawn recently. not just in class but socially as well. She's been avoiding group work, not participating in discussions like she used to. And we've noticed some signs of distress. She seems overwhelmed, anxious even. I felt my stomach churn. My daughter, my strong, independent girl, was struggling. But what could have caused this? Was it school? Was it something at home? Mrs. Lawson continued, her voice softer now. We also noticed she's been pulling away from her friends. That's not typical for her. I blinked, trying to process the information. Pulling away from her friends? That's when it hit me. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just at school. My daughter had been shutting down, and I hadn't even seen the signs. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice breaking. I've tried everything. She won't talk to me. She won't tell me what's wrong. Mrs. Lawson looked at me sympathetically. It might not be something you can fix on your own. Sometimes teenagers, especially girls, have a hard time opening up, especially when they're dealing with something personal. That's when she told me something that made my heart drop. There's been some talk at school, Mrs. Lawson said carefully, about bullying. I froze. I had never considered it, not once. Sure, I'd heard of it happening to other kids, but I never thought my own daughter, my strong, beautiful, confident girl, would be a target. Do you think she's being bullied? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I'm not sure, Mrs. Lawson said, shaking her head. But the signs are there. She's isolating herself, not engaging like she used to, and there's been some gossip going around. My mind was reeling, my heart ached for her, but at the same time, I felt a surge of guilt. How had I missed this? How had I not seen what was happening to my own child? I'm sorry to bring this to you, Mrs. Lawson continued, but I think you need to have a serious conversation with her. Let her know that she's not alone. As I walked out of the school, my head was spinning. Bullying, my daughter. I couldn't even wrap my mind around it. But one thing was crystal clear now. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand by and let her suffer in silence. When I got home, my daughter was already back from school, but she was in her room, like usual. I stood by her door for a few minutes, unsure of how to approach her. My heart was pounding. I had no idea what to say. I knew I needed to be careful. Too much, too soon. And she might close herself off completely. But I also knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I took a deep breath, knocked lightly on her door, and waited. Hey, can we talk? I called softly, my voice shaky but gentle. At first, there was nothing, just silence. I felt my pulse quicken. Then I heard her feet shuffle, and the door creaked open. She looked at me for a moment, and then her eyes dropped to the floor. It was the same thing every day, that invisible wall between us. I know you don't want to talk, but I need you to know that I'm here for you. You can tell me anything, sweetheart, I said, trying to sound calm and understanding, though my chest felt tight. She didn't respond at first, just stared at the floor like she couldn't bear to look at me. But then, to my surprise, she spoke in a barely audible voice. I don't want to talk about it. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Okay, but you know you don't have to go through this alone, right? If you ever feel like talking, I'll be here. I'm your mom. I'll always be here. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, just for a moment. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was frustration. I couldn't tell. But it was something. She didn't say anything more, but she didn't shut the door either. I stood there, not sure if I should push further or just leave it for now. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. I had to let her take the lead. I couldn't fix everything for her, as much as I wanted to. She needed to feel safe enough to come to me when she was ready. The next few days were a blur of awkward silence and small, strained attempts at conversation. I tried not to push too hard, but every time I saw her, the weight of the distance between us felt heavier. I couldn't tell if she was just scared or if she had shut me out for good. The worst part was, I still didn't know what was going on in her life, and I felt completely helpless. Then, one evening, after dinner, something unexpected happened. We were sitting at the table, the usual uncomfortable quiet filling the air, when my daughter suddenly spoke up, her voice small but steady. Mom, I need to tell you something. My heart leapt in my chest. I put my fork down and turned to her, my breath catching in my throat. This was it. She was finally opening up. I've been feeling, I don't know, like no one sees me, you know? She paused, looking down at her plate. Like I'm invisible, and at school, I don't know, people have been saying things, not to me, but about me, behind my back. My stomach dropped. It hit me like a punch to the gut. What kind of things, honey? I asked softly, my voice trembling now. She bit her lip, hesitating for a moment. Then she looked up at me, her eyes filled with the kind of pain I had been desperately trying to shield her from. "They call me a freak," she whispered. "They say I'm weird and that I think I'm better than everyone else. But I'm not like that. I don't know why they say that. I just want to fit in, and I don't know how." My heart shattered for her. It was like someone had taken my daughter's soul and trampled on it without even realizing how much it was hurting her. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Oh, sweetheart, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. You are not a freak. You are so special, so loved, and you never have to change for anyone. You are perfect the way you are." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry for shutting you out. I didn't know how to tell you, and I thought maybe you wouldn't understand." "I understand more than you know," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "and I will always be here for you, no matter what. No one has the right to make you feel this way, and we will figure this out together." That was the first time in weeks that I felt like we had finally made some progress. It wasn't a magical fix. There was still a lot of healing to be done, and I knew there were more tough conversations ahead. But in that moment, I knew that my daughter wasn't lost to me forever. We were getting there, slowly but surely. The days that followed weren't easy, but they were a start. We talked more, and although there were still times when my daughter would retreat into herself, I could see small glimmers of hope. Each time she opened up, it felt like a breakthrough, like we were slowly rebuilding the trust that had been broken between us. She'd tell me more about what was happening at school, and it was as if the more I listened, the more she began to believe that it was okay to be vulnerable. The bullying, though, was a constant weight. It wasn't just words either. The social isolation was eating away at her. She'd go to school each day, her friends drifting further away, and every time she came home, I could see the exhaustion on her face. She wasn't just physically tired, she was emotionally drained, fighting an invisible battle every single day. I kept asking myself how I could fix it, but the truth was, I couldn't. I couldn't go into her school and make it all better. I couldn't force the kids who were making her feel worthless to stop, but what I could do was make sure she knew she wasn't alone. One evening, I sat down with her again, this time in the living room. She had been on her phone for a while, staring at it in silence, and I could tell she wasn't just scrolling through social media. She was watching everything unfold. She was reading the words, the comments, the things that people said when they thought no one was watching. "Sweetheart," I began gently, "I know it's hard right now, but I need you to promise me something. If the things people are saying are making you feel worthless, you don't have to carry that with you. Those words don't define you." She looked up at me, her face pale, but there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I know, Mom," she said quietly. "It just feels like it's everywhere. I can't get away from it." "You don't have to, not by yourself," I reassured her, my voice firm now. "And you don't need to let those people steal your peace. I know it's hard, but you're stronger than they think. You're my daughter, and I will always fight for you." She gave me a small smile then, a real one. And for the first time in a while, I felt like we were in this together. Over the next week, we made a plan. I reached out to her school and talked to the counselor. We discussed what options were available for her, whether it was talking to someone about the bullying or making sure she had more support in class. I didn't want her to feel like she was fighting this battle on her own anymore, and slowly she started to feel like she wasn't invisible. There were moments when she seemed lighter, more confident, like the weight of the world wasn't crushing her chest. But it wasn't just the school or the support I was fighting for her. It was also about making sure that, at home, she knew she was loved, no matter what. No matter how hard things got, no matter what people said, I would always be there for her. I would always see her, even when she felt like no one else did. And that's when I realized something important. I couldn't fix everything. I couldn't erase the hurt, the cruelty, or the isolation. But I could give her the one thing that mattered most, my unwavering support. And that, in itself, made all the difference. Weeks went by, and while things didn't magically improve overnight, I could see the shift in my daughter. She was talking more openly with me, sharing her fears and frustrations, and slowly but surely, the spark that had been buried beneath her quiet exterior began to shine through. One afternoon, we were sitting together in the living room when she put down her phone and turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "I talked to some of the other girls today," she said, her voice softer than usual but filled with a certain strength I hadn't heard in a while. "I told them how I felt, about how the things they were saying were hurting me, and I think they listened." My heart soared. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was a small step, but it was a huge one for my daughter. I could see that she was starting to take back control over her own life, her own story. That's amazing, sweetheart, I replied, smiling at her. I'm so proud of you. I know it wasn't easy, but you were so brave. She looked down at her hands, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It was scary, Mom. I didn't know if they would listen or if they would just think I was being dramatic. But they said they didn't realize how much it was affecting me. They didn't want to hurt me. I could see the relief in her eyes, but I also knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more tough days ahead, more struggles to overcome, but now she knew that she had the power to make her voice heard. I know you're scared, but just remember that you don't have to carry this by yourself, I said, my voice steady. You have me, you have your friends, and you have your own strength, and that's more than enough. She nodded, but there was something different about the way she held herself now. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was beginning to stand up for herself in ways that I had been hoping for. And though I still worried about the long road ahead, I knew that she was no longer invisible. She had made herself visible again, not just to me, but to everyone around her. But as much as she had grown, there were still moments when the weight of the situation would come crashing back. One evening, after school, she came home looking tired. Her eyes were red, like she'd been holding back tears, and I could tell something was off. Hey, sweetheart, I called as she walked through the door. How was your day? She shrugged, not meeting my gaze. It was fine. I knew better than to push her, but the worry in my chest grew as I watched her retreat to her room without saying another word. My instincts told me something was still wrong. Maybe the words she'd heard weren't as easy to shake off as I had hoped. Later that night, I went into her room to check on her. She was lying on her bed, her eyes closed, but her shoulders were tense. I sat beside her and placed a hand gently on her back. You're doing so well, sweetheart, I said, rubbing her back in soothing circles. But you don't have to hide your feelings. You can talk to me whenever you're ready. I'm here. She opened her eyes then and looked at me, her gaze soft but conflicted. I don't know. Some days are better than others, but it's still hard. I don't think it'll ever be completely okay. I took a deep breath, my heart aching for her. It's okay to feel that way. Healing isn't a straight line. There will be good days, bad days, and some days where you feel like you're back at square one. But that doesn't mean you've lost ground. It just means you're human, and it's okay to be imperfect. She sniffled and wiped her eyes, then looked at me with a new sense of determination. I know, I'm trying, Mom. I really am. I know you are, I said, kissing her forehead. And I'm so proud of you. You don't have to do this alone. You've got me, always. That night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that made everything perfect, but it was the kind of peace that came from knowing my daughter was on her way to healing. She might have had her struggles, but she wasn't alone in them. And as her mother, I would fight for her, stand by her, and make sure she knew she was worthy of love, no matter what anyone else said. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I knew we were walking it together. The following months were a mixture of progress and setbacks, but I couldn't help but be proud of how far my daughter had come. She wasn't the same girl who had withdrawn into herself, hiding behind walls of silence and pain. She had started to rebuild, piece by piece, and while it wasn't easy, I could see her becoming more confident in who she was. I had seen how much it meant to her to know that she wasn't alone, and that meant the world to me. I had done everything I could to make sure that I was there for her, through all the tears, the tough conversations, and the moments where I felt like I couldn't fix everything, but knew I had to keep trying. And then one afternoon, something happened that made me realize just how much progress my daughter had made. It was the middle of the week, and she came home from school with a look of determination on her face. At first, I wasn't sure what it was, but when she sat down beside me at the kitchen table and said, "I want to go to that anti-bullying rally at school," I felt a mix of emotions flood over me. She had been hesitant to talk about things like that before, hesitant to put herself out there, to take action. But here she was, ready to speak up. "I know it's not easy, but you're stronger than you think," I told her. "If this is something you want to do, then I'll support you, no matter what." "I think it's time," she said softly. "I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did. Maybe if I can help others, it'll make a difference." That was all I needed to hear. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I had always wanted my daughter to be brave, but this was more than I had ever imagined. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for others too. And in doing so, she was proving to herself and to the world that she wasn't going to let the hurt and the bullying define her. The day of the rally arrived, and I could feel the excitement and nerves radiating off her. I told her to dress comfortably, but she chose something special to wear, something that felt empowering to her. I knew she wasn't just going to show up to the rally, she was going to be part of something bigger. When we arrived at the school, I could see other kids gathered around, some holding signs, others talking about the impact of bullying. My daughter walked toward the group with her head held high, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She was surrounded by others who had been through similar struggles, all of them united by a shared experience and a desire to make a change. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it was enough to create a shift in the atmosphere. As she stood in front of the group, her voice shaky at first, I could see her fighting the nerves. But when she began to speak, it was like everything else fell away. Her words were powerful, raw and real, but filled with hope. She spoke about her own experience, about the pain she had felt, and about how important it was to stand up for others who were facing the same struggles. I watched her in awe, realizing that the girl who had once felt invisible was now standing in front of a crowd, her voice shaking the silence with truth. In that moment, I felt like I was watching a part of her blossom that I had always known was there. And when she was done speaking, the room erupted into applause. The kids who had gathered around her seemed to look at her differently, not with pity or judgment, but with admiration and respect. She wasn't just someone who had been hurt. She was someone who had taken her pain and turned it into something powerful. That night, as we sat together and talked about the rally, I could see a sense of pride in my daughter's eyes that I had never seen before. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a voice for others who had suffered in silence, and that transformation, though long and hard, was something I would never forget. "I did it, Mom," she said, her voice filled with a sense of accomplishment. "I really did it." "You did, sweetheart," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. "And I couldn't be prouder of you. You've come so far, and this is just the beginning." She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it was a smile that didn't hide the pain. It was a smile that reflected strength, resilience, and a belief in herself. As a mother, there's nothing more beautiful than seeing your child fight for what they believe in, especially after all they've been through. My daughter wasn't just growing up, she was growing stronger, and I knew, without a doubt, that whatever the future held, we would face it together. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for both of us. My daughter had found her voice, and that rally was only the beginning. I had seen her grow in ways I didn't think possible, from the quiet girl who was afraid to speak up to the brave young woman who was standing up for what was right. But even though I knew she was becoming stronger, the reality was that there would still be challenges ahead. The world wasn't always going to be kind, and there would still be moments where she felt unsure of herself. But that wasn't what scared me anymore. What scared me was how quickly time was passing. She was growing up so fast, and I couldn't always protect her from the hard things. All I could do was continue to guide her, support her, and love her unconditionally. One evening, as we sat together at the kitchen table, my daughter spoke up again, her voice much more confident than I had heard it in a long time. "Mom, I was thinking—" She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. "I want to help more people. I think I can do more than just speak at rallies. Maybe I could work with a group that helps kids who are going through what I went through. I don't want anyone to feel like they're alone." I felt tears welling up in my eyes again, but this time, they were happy tears. Happy because I had watched her take her hurt and turn it into something that could heal others. She wasn't just going to be a victim of her circumstances, she was going to use everything she had learned to make a real difference in the world. "Sweetheart, you're already doing so much. You've come so far, and I know you'll keep growing. I'm so proud of you, and I'll support you in whatever you decide to do." She smiled, and I could see the passion in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her to stand up in front of that crowd at the rally. In that moment, I realized that I had witnessed the most beautiful transformation, a transformation from fear to strength, from silence to voice. And it wasn't just her transformation, it was ours. We had both learned that it was okay to be vulnerable, that healing took time, and that love, support, and understanding could make all the difference in the world. My daughter had taught me that. She had shown me what true strength looked like, and now I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together, side by side, with strength, compassion, and love. As we hugged each other that night, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning.